It's a joint resolution requesting Congress to call for a convention of states to propose amendments to the United States Constitution under Article 5. Article 5 allows two options to amend the Constitution as needed. The most common one that everybody knows about is the method through Congress. The other one that's not necessarily known about as much and has never actually been used is to bypass Congress and go through the states. And the states have an incredible authority and power with Article 5 to bypass Congress in the case of what I would call a runaway Congress and a runaway federal government. And we'll get to that in a minute. I will go through the bill. Page 1, we have some findings. Whereas the founders of the Constitution of the United States empowered state legislatures to be guardians of liberty against future abuses of power by the federal government. And whereas the federal government has created a crushing national debt through improper and imprudent spending. Flipping over to page 2, whereas the federal government has invaded the legitimate roles of the states through the manipulative process of federal mandates, many of which are unfunded mandates. And whereas the federal government has ceased to operate under a proper interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. And whereas it is the solemn duty of the states to protect the liberty of our people, particularly for generations to come, by proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States through a convention of the states under Article 5 for the purposes of restraining these and related abuses of power. If you'll pardon me, I'm still recovering from COVID, so I'm a little short of breath and it's kind of hard to breathe, so bear with me on that. At the bottom of page 2 is where the call happens. This is the important part. 15 other states have passed identical language to what we're about to read. And so hopefully Wyoming will be the next. This call is important. Section 1. Now therefore be it resolved by the members of the Wyoming, or members of the legislature of the state of Wyoming, that the legislature of the state of Wyoming hereby applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States for the calling of a convention of the states limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States that impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. And it moves on to Section 2. The legislature of the state adopts the application under Section 1 of this joint resolution expressly subject and to the following reservations, understandings, and declarations. Number 1, an application to the Congress of the United States to call a convention of the states pursuant to Article 5 for this purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution confers no power to Congress other than the power to call the convention. The power of Congress to exercise this ministerial duty consists solely of the authority to name a reasonable time and place for the initial meeting of a convention. Number 2, Congress shall call an amendment convention of the states only upon the receipt of applications for an amendment convention for the substantially same purpose, this application, from 2/3 of the legislatures of the several states. And it goes on to limit Congress in number 3. Congress does not have the power or authority to determine any rules for the governing of an amendment convention of the United States, of the states, called pursuant to Article 5. We don't have the authority to set the number of delegates, nor does it have the power to name delegates to a convention. These are all important safeguards. Number 4, by definition, Convention of the States to propose amendments to the Constitution means that states shall vote on the basis of one state, one vote. Moving on to number 5, Convention of the States to propose amendments to the Constitution convened pursuant to this application shall be limited to the consideration of the topics specified in this joint resolution and no other. This application is made with the express understanding that an amendment in any way seeks to amend, modify, or repeal any provision of the Bill of Rights shall not be authorized for consideration. And it goes on to talk about the ratification process, number 6, whether it be through the legislatures of the several states or by special state ratification conventions. And number 7, the legislature may provide further instructions to its delegates and may recall its delegates at any time for a breach of duty or violation of the instructions provided. Section 3 talks about the application process constitutes a continuing application in accordance with Article 5 until the legislatures of at least 2/3 of the several states have made applications on the same subject. And Section 4 instructs the Secretary of State to transmit copies of this resolution to the appropriate parties. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I know there's a lot of people here that want to testify on and against the bill. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman, for that, if anybody wishes to make any comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Good job. Good job on introducing that bill. We'll open it up for public comment now, and I'd like to go for and against, if you could get that figured out so that we don't just have all against or all for the resolution. So who wants to be first? Go ahead. Come up to the microphone, please. Come up to the microphone and identify yourself so everybody knows who you are.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator Anderson and the Committee for Minerals. We appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I especially appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am here with some friends today.
Excuse me, sir. Would you
Can
please
you please identify yourself?
Would you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Name is Dave Lockman, 73 years old, and a 50-year resident of the state of Wyoming. So I'm no youngster for Wyoming. Anyway, I come here with 5 friends today that represent, interestingly, going clear back to the time of George Washington at Valley Forge. Ron's grandfather, 11 generations ago, served right under General Washington at Valley Forge. And that Declaration of Independence became the forerunner of what became the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States of America. My father served in World War II in all 13 theaters of the South Pacific. He taught flag etiquette all through his life to schools and so on. He started a war memorial in Brighton, Colorado. Ron's dad landed on Normandy Beach, so went through a lot of heck when he was there. My brother, Ron, served in Vietnam, and we're concerned about, our families spent a lot of their lives and families defending our Constitution. And we're very concerned, all of us, about the future of our Constitution based on what's happening today in Washington, D.C. We have a lot of coffee time together. I and my friends talking about this in the mornings, the ones that are retired anyway. I just retired a couple of years ago. And that's why we're here today. It's been befuddling to me after getting more involved with the good people that are concerned about this Convention of States, that Wyoming hasn't got right in the forefront of it. We don't have many tools left, the way we look at it, to preserve our republic and the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And so we'd appreciate anything you could do to help us along them lines, so that our kids and grandkids can have a future in this great country. And we don't have a lot of options left. We look at it, and this is something the states can do. That in the ballot box, if hopefully we can keep it from changing the rules there. But anyway, well, thank you for letting us speak And we'd appreciate your yes vote. And for you to get out behind with your colleagues in the Senate and House and really get this thing going. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Lockman, and your party of 5. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do we have anybody on Zoom waiting in the wait room? Because I think Mr. Meckler wanted to speak and he's on Zoom, I believe. And Rihanna, is he in there?
I'm sorry, Senator Brightman, repeat his name again. There's 27 attendees.
Oh, wow. Okay. Mr. Mark Meckler from Convention of States.
Yes, he has not raised his hand, but I did want to let Chairman Anderson know that we do have 5 other people who've raised their hands, so I'm not sure if they are for or against it. So how would you like to handle that, Chairman Anderson?
I guess we just start calling on them. Is there anybody else in person that would like to speak before we get online? No one else in person that would like to speak?
Well, is this for or against? Well, they just said they wanted to go for or against, but if you're looking for an against, I don't know if there's one in this room for the speaking person. Okay. Oh.
State your name and
Yes, my name is Leah Southwell, Southwell. Mr. Chairman and committee members, I have a bit of a unique and important personal story to tell you. And I'll attempt to make it as short as possible as it pertains to this resolution and the good intentions behind it. I'd also like to let you know that I truly believe that every single one of us in this room has the same intention. We are all on the same side. We are all on the same side in that something needs to be done. The states want to restore the balance of power, and we are all together on this. However, there's different methods of doing this, and I stand in opposition to this method. My story began about 8 years ago when I took my 2 teenage sons with me for an adventure of a lifetime to go live in the country of Chile, the #1 most successful country in Latin America, and at that time, the 7th most economically free country in the world. Although I could see some problems brewing, I also saw a nation filled with opportunity, thus our reason for staying so long. In October of 2019, just a year and a half ago, overnight, massive civil unrest began, causing a state of emergency, bringing the military to the streets to fight with an unknown enemy, intent upon starting a revolution. With the total chaos came out of nowhere 1 million people assembled to protest with complaints from every imaginable corner of the country. Amongst them, a call for the president to step down, sound familiar? And a new constitution. Their constitution was mostly duplicated from our US Constitution. After 6 weeks of nonstop destruction, $2 billion worth, and extreme violence, President Piñera finally gave in to one of the demands and agreed to a people's referendum for a new constitution. This was the day that my son and I made the decision to leave Chile and return home. We knew that at least 70% of the people would vote for a new constitution because I had already asked everyone I knew to tell me what specifically in the Constitution was causing the problems. None could answer that, but all believed that a new constitution would be the magic they needed to resolve all their complaints. In actuality, 79% of the people voted for this. They are currently in the process of the people electing their delegates to write this constitution. To keep it politically correct, 50% of the delegates must be women, and the indigenous Indians have ensured their place at the table. They will have 1 year to complete the task, and then it will go before the people for a vote, a simple for or against it. I guarantee you it will be no better than the one they have now, and it will certainly move the country away from a free market and limited government. As this was occurring, I asked my very many Venezuelan friends living and working in Chile, for obvious reasons, what they thought was happening. They all said they knew exactly what was happening, as this is how Venezuela, formerly the #1 most prosperous nation in Latin America, was taken down. They also told me that they were the protests demanding these changes, and that they too believed the politicians and agitators promoting this. I asked them what they would do about this now that they had moved and invested to Chile. They said they were all trying to warn the Chileans. I asked them how the Chileans responded to their warnings, and they told the same thing they told themselves when the Cubans came to warn them: to not fall into the trap being set. They said, "We're not Venezuela. We would never fall for that. We're much too smart for that." And that is what the Venezuelans told the Cubans also. I know that this is just a resolution for amending the Constitution, not a request for a new Constitution. My warning to you: even if all the assurances of the Convention of States and Mark Meckler are promising you, as in that you, the state legislators, have control over the rules and the delegates and the ratification process, you are playing with the enemies of the Constitution that don't play by the rules. They're in it for all or nothing. They want to eliminate the final restraints still in their way. For 233 years, this method of amending the Constitution has been carefully guarded and wisely avoided for very good reasons. Nowhere in the Constitution does it provide or ensure the state's control over this process. The Conventions of State and Mark Meckler's assurances are merely part of a wish list that cannot be guaranteed. It is nowhere in the Constitution. You can't control those not abiding by the rules by adding to the rules. It's time for you to consider ways to rein them in through ways currently available to you now and always have been. The states created the federal government, and the Constitution is the limitation imposed upon them. The Bill of Rights states that it's not mentioned in the enumerated powers clause. Those powers were to be retained to the states and to the people. It's time to restore this power granted to you. Enforce and bind them down by the Constitution. If you can't tell me what is specifically wrong with our Constitution, then you're focused on the wrong solution to the problem. I urge you to stop this dangerous and desperate attempt before you aid in the chaos that will ensue if we ever have a call for a constitutional convention. From my experience, it will not likely be the peaceful remedy that you are seeking. Please vote no on this resolution. Thank you for your time and attention, and I remain for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Southwell. Is there any questions? Yes, Senator Wasserberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to compliment Ms. Southwell. Your presentation was very well done, and I thank you for that. It took a lot of courage to come up here and say that. But I would like to point out, at least for me, as we move down this path, I think many Americans have become very frustrated because they're not seeing anything happen with Congress. And so they found an alternative way to amend the Constitution. The Constitution has never been amended this way, as I understand it.
Correct.
And so it's an extremely difficult process. If they are successful in doing that, it would be extremely unusual in American history. The second part of that is there's a huge check. There's a huge check on the power of the Convention of States. And that ultimately is 34 states must approve a constitutional amendment. 38 states. And so that will have to be done by a vote of all those states, 3/4 of them. Okay, and so I think there's an appropriate check in the Constitution by our founding fathers. And so I guess I'm not really worried about a runaway convention, because each one of those amendments will have to be passed by a vote of the people. And we need to remember there's only 27 amendments, and we've been around for 230 odd years. So it's very difficult. I think the last I checked, I used to teach American government at Campbell County High School, but the last time I checked, there were about 5,000 proposed amendments. There's probably a lot more than that now. And so only 27 of them made it. And so 10 of those were with the Bill of Rights that were done immediately after the adoption of the Constitution. So it even looks more difficult. And so I just wanted to thank you for your testimony, and I appreciate your time.
May I comment on that?
Sure.
Okay. I'd like to remind you that in 1787, we had the Articles of Confederation,
Right.
and the representatives of each state were sent with specific instructions. One of them was that the ratification process was that all states, all 13 unanimously must ratify any amendments to the Articles of Confederation. And yet when they went into that conference, it was a closed door session. They closed the door, no one knew what was happening. And in that convention, the ratification process was changed.
Right.
They went against the rules that they were sent there with. So if our delegates are sent with the expectation of a 3/4 majority to ratify this, what's going to stop those delegates from a closed door session and changing the ratification to a simple majority of the states? Something like that. What would stop them from doing the same that they did in the last convention?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I have a follow-up, please?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the answer for that is quite simply that the 38 states is in the Constitution itself. So that would have to be a constitutional amendment that would have to be voted on. I don't believe the convention can change the Constitution without a constitutional amendment. So it still would be 38 states, at least in my mind.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Sure.
What happened with the Articles of Confederation was they went in to amend the Articles of Confederation. What they ended up doing was throwing out our government form and recreating something new. What's to prevent that from happening again?
Okay. Is there any other questions for Ms. Southwell? Any other questions? Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Senator Rothfuss.
Oh, Senator Rothfuss, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank you for your testimony also, and I share the concerns that you've presented as well. The quick question I would have for you is, you mentioned Chile and you mentioned Venezuela. Did they have protections in place that they thought would protect them from the same types of concerns that you're raising here?
Excellent question. And yes,
Ms.
thank you.
Southwell, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Uh-huh.
Excellent question. Yes, in fact, the one aspect that they wanted to make the first change to in Venezuela was that they had a supermajority of 2/3 majority that had to pass thing. That was the first thing that they went after and eliminated. And at that moment, they could no longer control communism from taking over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, just one note, if I may.
Go ahead.
We're relying on rules and a belief that everybody will follow rules when they get to this circumstance of a Article 5 convention. I look around this room right now of the proponents, and far less than half of you are wearing masks, which is the rule that we have right now. Do you see the shields, folks? The shields are a supplement that allows the folks up here to be screened. You'll see when you came in signs that said that all of you are obligated to be wearing masks. So when we contemplate the protection of rules and advocate by folks that won't follow the simple ones, it's a challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Any other questions for Ms. Southwell? Other questions? Other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Ms. Southwell, for your testimony. Thank you very much for coming today in person and presenting to us. Is there some more from the public that would like to speak to the committee in the room? One more?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I take off my mask? Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. My name is Steve Dewar. I've lived in Wyoming about 40 years, been a lawyer about 40 years, an energy law lawyer working in Jackson, but most of the time living in Sublette County. With all due respect, that last testimony, in my opinion, indicates a profound misunderstanding of Article 5. Article 5 is in the Constitution. Article 5 is the pressure release that our founders intended for times like this, when our federal government is the tyrant. Article 5 and a convention of states could release the political powder keg that we saw on January 6th, where people are completely frustrated with their federal government and don't know what to do. Nothing justifies violence. But Article 5 is intended to give our leaders an opportunity to talk about solutions to the present problems. I'm from Teton County. Recently, Teton County was characterized in a book called Billionaire Wilderness. Might go too far because of the good philanthropy in Teton County, but it seems in this country, the wealthier people become, the more political elite they become, the more they are like the West and East Coast. They have no connection with the flyover states, with the red states, with the working people. Some call them the forgotten, like us. Political elite in Teton County with no connection to Wyoming's working people, like Liz Cheney. So I have 7 kids.
Please refrain from referring to personal and persons. Keep it on a professional level, please, sir.
Thank you. So anyway, I apologize if that was inappropriate, if true. So I have 7 kids, 7 grandchildren. I've been involved with Convention of States since 2014. I got involved primarily because of what I saw was the runaway Congress spending trillions of dollars. When I testified in 2017 at the House Judiciary Committee hearing, I had this Time Magazine article on the front cover of this Time Magazine article from May of 2016. It said, what would it take for the 330 million Americans to make America solvent? The number then was a $14 trillion national deficit. The number on the front of Time Magazine is roughly $43,000 per individual to make our country solvent. That was 2016. We've had Republicans and Democrats contributed to this problem. In the last 4 years, before COVID, we were at 28 trillion. Roughly in 4 years, our national deficit doubled. Now the House has passed a new COVID relief bill, almost 2 trillion. Of that, 91% has nothing to do with COVID. That means now we're talking about $32 trillion that my kids and grandkids are going to be saddled with. This is immoral. It's unconstitutional and immoral. How much is a trillion? Well, if you wanted to put it in terms of this, how many seconds are in 1 trillion? We'll get a sense for this. Get 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, get up to 365 days a year counting seconds. The number in seconds, if we divide by a year, it's 31,000 years. 31,000 years of seconds counted as dollars, and we're 30 times that. It's an impossible number. The real danger is the runaway federal government under both Republicans and Democrats. How will Wyoming legislators know if it's finally time to decide to lead and pass the resolution and join states to attend a convention of states? Wyoming legislators will know it's time when the federal government on day one threw away our energy independence, destroyed our energy independence, and crushed Wyoming's energy industry. We'll know it's time to meet with other states to discuss solutions to this. Senator Brasso, quoting the Wyoming Petroleum Association, said, if this policy is implemented to appease the Green New Dealers and nothing more than appeasing the radical far left, it will cost Wyoming 33,000 jobs and, of course, the funding for our schools.
Mr. Hero, are you about to wrap up? We've got a lot of speakers.
Thank you.
We do appreciate your information and all your notes and research, but we do need to move on.
Mr. Chairman, may I say one thing?
You bet. You bet.
The other lady seemed to have quite a bit of latitude. We've seen a letter circulated from a friend of mine whom I respect, former Representative Halverson, and she is talking about, and I say this without condescension, but she's talking about 3 reasons why Wyoming should be against a convention of states. She used these arguments in 2017 on the House floor. 1, she says, it's naive to think that in a convention of states, amendments will be proposed that will impose on the federal government fiscal restraints. It's naive. And the reason it's naive is because both Republicans and Democrats are used to spending billions and trillions, and it's the lifeblood of politics in Washington, D.C. Well, just because it's naive doesn't mean we shouldn't try. She also says term limits. If you want an example why term limits won't work, look at California. That was her explanation. It doesn't work in California. It doesn't work in California because California has what the federal government has with a one-party system. If the federal government passes HR1 and S1, it's a one-party system. Of course, term limits don't work. And then she talks about nullification as a preferred method. Well, nullification is not a constitutional remedy like Article 5. Article 5 is in the Constitution. It's a method of amending the Constitution prepared for just this time when, what if the federal government is the tyrant? That's where we are. Nullification didn't work for the South, but led to the Civil War. Article 5 could disarm the political power keg that our country is facing. Please help us get to a convention of states. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hero. That was very good. That was very good. Anyone else in the audience that'd like to speak? And remember, try to keep your remarks limited so that we can get through all these people. We have a limited amount of time. State your name and
My name is Rod Guile, Pine Haven, Wyoming. I'm a volunteer for the Convention States Project. I had some handouts, and I guess by your protocol, can't do it. I would definitely like to email it to you.
Yep.
The reason I volunteered years ago, been going on 5 years or more, I really got tired of hearing how our founders were criminals. I did some research. I thought this doesn't jive with the way I was brought up. There is a confirmation bias that if you hear something that flows according to what you feel and what you've heard, then the evidence doesn't really matter. And I thought, I need to look this up for myself. This document that I had for you shows 10 states gave their credentials for their delegates to do whatever it took. You can read it for yourself. You can research it. I can provide the email links if you would like. But if you research it yourself, you're going to see that our founders did everything that was in their credentials. 2 states said, the Congress at that time said, was the first one to bring it that you're supposed to just fix the Articles of Confederation. I want to suggest that they had no play in the convention. You read the Articles of Confederation, there's nothing that says they can do that. There's nothing that say they can call and tell the states to meet up and go over a convention. It's not there. They did everything they were supposed to do and saved the Union. On the ratification issue, 3 documents came out of that convention, 1787. The Constitution, there was a ratification and transition elements that they did not want to put in a permanent constitution. They wanted it separate. And then there was a letter from George Washington explaining how to go about this. The ratification by 9 states was not changed by the convention. They had no power. They sent it on to the Congress, all 3 documents. The flow of that process suggested by the convention was to, if you approve this, send it on to the states, and the states can send it on to ratification by convention. You will notice that even Rhode Island, who didn't even take part in the convention, they agreed to send it to the state ratification conventions because they had no problem with 9 states ratifying. They all 13 states, 26 bodies, plus the body of the Congress, 27 bodies agreed that, yes, let's go forward with this and let's see if the states will ratify. The 9th state to ratify was New Hampshire, after all these bodies agreed that this is what we should do. It's amazing to hear people say that they went beyond their authority and that this convention changed anything. They had no power, just as we have no power in this convention to change anything. We can propose. We can propose all the amendments under those 34 agendas. You've all been to diplomatic and legislative meetings where you have an agenda. Somebody decides that they want to bring something outside that agenda. What do you guys say? Point of order. It's not on the agenda. And that is the end of that debate. It's so simple. And you can, Madison had a great word that he used when he was arguing in the Federalist 40. I tell everybody that the Federalist Papers were a quill and pen Zoom meeting, but it took about 2 weeks or so to get the arguments back and forth. So in all these Federalist Papers, they would lay out the opposition, and they would debate and answer that discussion. But he had a word, cavil. It's frivolous. Some of the arguments are so frivolous, and yet he felt that you had to answer them. He answered the ratification problem by saying Rhode Island was never going to agree to this. So that's why they proposed 9 states to ratify. His argument was, why should 1/60th of the population back then hold up the other process for 59/60ths of the population? Seems pretty rational to me. And then to find out later that even Rhode Island said, okay, we'll send it for ratification to the conventions and see if they want to do it. And that's what happened. Our founders were true blue and inspired by God to take care of this problem that they had. They had Britain waiting to jump all over them. They had states going to go to war. It seemed to work, and it only worked by God's providence because they did what they were told. I'd take any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Mr. Guile? Any questions for Mr. Guile? Hearing none, Mr. Guile, thank you very much. Thanks for coming down here and coming before us. Thank you. Any other people from the audience?
Awesome.
Thank Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. It's a real honor to be here, especially in this beautiful Capitol. My name is Julie Baker, and I'm a volunteer with Convention of States. And I'm not going to talk about process, but just about my feelings about, why I want the Convention of States. Our state legislators, you're our friends and our neighbors. And if we don't know you personally, you're at minimum accessible and approachable and responsive to us. I don't have to tell you that we're in a really precarious position right now. Our debt's exploding, burdening generations. Our liberties are being eroded daily. Our traditions are being destroyed. Our faith is being mocked. And you guys are the gatekeepers. Our legislature is the gatekeeper of that. The states are empowered by the Constitution to push back, and push back we should. I might be in a bubble, it's quite possible, but I don't know anyone who likes the current relationship between Washington, D.C. and state legislatures. Our state legislatures are at risk of becoming at best administrators for the federal government, and at worst, totally irrelevant. Already, D.C. dictates how the states spend substantial portions of the budget, and without check, they'll just continue to dictate more. What other constitutional mechanism is there, for example, to stop the federal government spending $1.9 trillion other than the Convention of States? I would much rather discuss with you what policies we decide are best for Wyoming than be dictated to by DC. And you're in a position to ensure the relationship that we now have is maintained and improved. The amendments that could be proposed through this Article 5 convention will allow us, through you, to determine the destiny of Wyoming. Let's not leave it up to DC to determine the destiny of Wyoming. That's all I have.
Any questions for Ms. Baker?
Any questions?
Any questions? Any questions, committee, for Ms. Baker? Hearing none, thank you, Ms. Baker, for coming for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chair and committee for hearing me. My name is Clancy Fairchild. I live here in Wyoming. I haven't lived here very long. I'm a retired vet. I gave 22 years defending the Constitution. I'm not an enemy of it, and I take offense to that immensely. What my colleagues that you've heard come up before and talk about and say, talking about the trillions of dollars, our federal government is standing up almost every day saying, we need more money. We need more taxes. We need you to pay more taxes. They turn around and send it overseas. The United States is not the world's ATM. It needs to stop. And we're asking you to help us make it stop. I mean, look at H.R. 5 that they're looking to pass, which takes more parental control away from the parents. I've got 3 sons. Thank God they're all grown, but I worry about what world we're going to leave them. But right now, a minor can have an abortion without discussing that with their parents. That's wrong. Whether you're on or against abortion, it's wrong that a minor can choose to have electoral surgery like that. It needs to stop. That's the overreach of the government. And they've been doing it so much, the federal government. I'm not trying to get in an argument with you gentlemen right now on that. We need the convention. It seems to be the last. I haven't been with the convention very long. I've known about it. I've followed it. But with current events happening, it's forced us to come forward here. And we're submitting this, asking you to help us. Before things get worse, you saw the run on the Capitol in D.C. I don't want to see that again. It broke my heart. I support and defend the Constitution. But these people that did that, part of them feel marginalized, where they don't have a voice. The media censoring them. They're being told, no, you didn't see what you didn't see. The courts won't hear them. What options we got left, guys? Help me. That's all we're asking. And I thank you for your time.
Any questions for Mr. Fairchild?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, there's one.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Baker.
Yes, Mr. Fairchild, thank you for your
You're welcome.
service. Thank you. God bless you, sir. How does it make you feel when you hear the opposition try to scare the Convention of States people into not doing anything, basically? Fear is debilitating with all the what ifs. You're coming to me emotionally pleading for help. Help, let us help you, right? That's
Yes, sir.
what you're saying. So how does it feel when you hear those scare tactics to try to shut you down? Explain to me, sir, how that makes you feel.
It makes me angry. It makes me upset. It makes me worried. There's a whole book full of emotions that I could throw out there for you guys. But the one thing I would really like to point out, we have no other option. We've tried it the other way for how many years? 230 some, you said. What has it gotten us? Has it made it? No. To do the same thing over and over and over again is the very definition of insanity. I'm not insane, are y'all? I mean, seriously. But those are the way it makes me feel, sir.
Other questions for Mr. Fairchild?
Mr.
Other
Chairman,
questions? Yes,
Chris, thanks.
Senator Rothfuss.
Sir, I wanted to follow up on that. As the opposition, it's certainly not my intention to be attacking anyone in this room or thinking anything bad of any of you. I know that all of your motivations and intentions are the same as mine. Better for the country, trying to make things work. I appreciate your service as well. So I hope nobody thinks that we're on opposite sides in terms of the overall objective of really making things better for everyone. And I wouldn't suggest that of your motivations under any circumstance. The question I have, sir, is, and this is the concern that really is at the core for me, if we can't elect folks to the US Congress that can do what we want them to do, how can we choose folks to go to this convention that will do what we want them to do? And why would we expect better outcomes? I mean, we have a system of election. We send people there that don't do the things we want them to do, but somehow an entirely new system, an Article 5 system, will achieve where our current Constitution has apparently failed us. And that's what I wrestle with a lot. So I'd ask you about that. And again, I too thank you for your service. I understand your motivation is fully and completely trying to move to what you believe is in the best interest of the country. And we just share that motivation. We just might see things differently. And I fully respect your opinion on it. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I just don't know why we can pick a different group of people and they'll come up with a better outcome.
Okay. When they get to
Mr. Fairchild, you want to address that?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. I thought of you. Yes. The people that go to Washington are treated extremely well. That's one of the arguments I've had with people in our own group here. They're civil servants, yet they're treated like royalty. And they've been treated like royalty for so long, they actually think they are. If you treat somebody long enough, they actually begin to think it on it. And how this is not changing a whole new radical system, like you said. This is putting limits on those very people so that they can't do what they're trying to do, what you're accusing them of, or not. That's the wrong word, and I'm sorry. What we're talking that they may be doing on it from the word on it. So that's how, and who you send, that's up to y'all. I can't decide that. The way that it works, you guys vote, you say, okay, Wyoming's joining, we're going forward, then you pick. If there's people you don't trust, don't send them. And it doesn't have to be people in the legislature. It can be anybody. If you're going to sit there and tell me there is not one single moral person in the state of Wyoming to do this, then we got a whole lot bigger problems than I thought we did before I sat down.
Okay, good, Mr. Fairchild. Any other questions for Mr. Fairchild?
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up.
Yes.
And, I understand that, but I guess the challenge back would be if we've got these exceptional folks that should be making the decision on how we would rewrite the Constitution, let's just send them to Washington DC first and make them our legislators.
So they can get corrupted, so that they can get swayed and treated like royalty.
And Mr. Chairman, I would say at that point, yeah, point of order, go ahead.
I apologize.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, I'm just a old-time country boy that needs people to address the chair and to talk through the chairman, if they would, please, Mr. Chairman, if you would do that for me, I would appreciate it.
And Mr. Chairman, sir, and again, the Constitution provides the solution for that, which is send them home when you don't trust them anymore. And vote me out of office when you don't like me. And I kind of feel like right now a lot of you might do that if you could. But Mr. Chairman, that's the mechanism, is the first thing I would say. And then the question I have, what if this convention doesn't come back with the amendments that you want, but comes back, for example, with a constitutional amendment that I can absolutely see proposed for the state of Wyoming, which is most of the rest of the states are pretty angry that we have 3 electoral votes for 580,000 people. So imagine that one comes back, which says, all right, let's get rid of the electoral college. Let's try and find a way where we can have the Senate be proportionate with the number of people in the state. And really, a lot of other states are going to like that. What's the thought then, if that's a popular amendment with other states, but clearly not in the best interest of Wyoming?
Mr. Fairchild, do you want to answer that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sir, 34 states must agree on the agenda.
Yeah.
Just before it to happen. If any other agenda is tried to propose, it's thrown out. It can't be done. They have to then turn around. They have to come here and sit before you and say, we want another constitutional convention. Here's our agenda. So that's the checks. There's many checks and balances in this process. And I'd also like to point out, you said the Constitution gives us the right to send the people. It also gives us this right. Our founding fathers put that in there as a tool for us to use. And they were very smart men. And if you think you're smarter than them, I would say that you're probably, there's an old saying, if you think you're the smartest guy in the room, you're probably not. Our founding fathers were giants and they knew what they were doing.
Thank you, Mr. Fairchild. Be sure and keep this on a non-personal level.
I was
Any other questions for Mr. Fairchild? Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Fairchild, for coming and your testimony. Thank you very much. Any other comments from the attendants?
Come on up. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sandy Shaner and I live in Cheyenne. I did not plan to testify today, but after hearing the convoluted testimony of Ms. Southwell, I just had to say a few things, and especially to you, Senator Rothfuss, who I do think you are misinformed on this or don't understand it because you called it a system. It's not a system. I have this feeling that there's an ego involved in here, and that's why people don't want to vote for it, because they think that we, the people, and using Article 5 are trying to take away your job to make a decision about something. Well, we, the people, should have the right to do that anyway. But when Ms. Southwell talked about Chile and Venezuela, that's the way we feel. We're in that situation right now. We want to get out of it. We've just fallen. You can see things are falling. People are out of jobs. People rose to death in Texas. That was totally unnecessary. It's the riots, the anarchists that are given credibility now. We have anarchists who are perfectly fine. Riots in this. Did you not see the riots? Now, I do find out that many people that I know did not know about the riots all summer up in Seattle and Oregon. They weren't aware of it because they only watched MSNBC, and I guess it wasn't reported. I don't know. But when, say, President Trump was going to send the National Guard in to help with the riots, to help save lives and help people from losing their buildings being burned down, the Democrat governors told them, don't you dare send those troops in here. But then, of course, we had 30,000 National Guard troops to defend the Capitol, which is so ironic. Talk about nullification. The Democrat governors used it to create sanctuary cities, sanctuary states. It's whatever, whenever whoever is in charge wants to use it. They're going to use their states' rights when there's a, well, in this case, it was the Democrats are using it against the Republican in the presidency. And now that they're there, they want to have everything federal because that's where they're in control. Now we have a huge fence and wall all the way around the Capitol. Anyway, and also as far as runaway spending goes, the new COVID relief bill, $1.9 trillion. Yes, I don't remember the percentage, but it is something like 9% is for COVID relief. There are the most outrageous things in that bill to build a subway for Silicon Valley, the richest, most notorious people in our country. We're supposed to pay to build them a subway? Come on, this is insanity. And you guys know it and you should know it. And that's the whole reason for this, is to try to have some say in this runaway spending. And like that attorney that spoke earlier, we're concerned for, Mr. Chairman, we're concerned for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And we are not going in the right direction right now, as you can see. So you say we're all on the same page, we all want the best for the country. No, I don't think so. Not when we have the whole state of Texas frozen to death and we have thousands upon thousands of people out of work. Do you know, I just learned after being in the oil and gas business for 43 years that the state of New York imports natural gas from Russia because Chuck Schumer doesn't want to have a pipeline from the neighboring state, Pennsylvania. Can you imagine such nonsense? Talk about worrying about a carbon footprint. What about the tankers that are hauling that gas all the way from Russia? It's absurd. That's what we're trying to do. We want to have some say. This is absolutely outrageous. That's all. I just had to speak. It was just too much, too convoluted. And also, when Ms. Southwell said this wasn't in the Constitution, well, that's completely false. It is in the Constitution.
Okay,
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr.
Shaner, thank you for your time. Is there any questions for Ms. Shaner? Any questions for Ms. Shaner? Thank you, Ms. Shaner. Thank you for coming forward. Is there anyone else? Anyone else in the audience? Anyone else in the audience? Oh, there is one. Give us your name and
Hello, Mr. Chairman. My name and committee members, my name is Mark Russell. I am from Story, Wyoming. And over the last 10 years, I have been, thank you for this opportunity. Over the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work with politicians running for office. One of my passions is to train and equip politicians to be effective in running their campaigns. And I came across this Convention of States, and I was curious about it. And I just want to share a little bit about my educational process. I watched a lot of the opposition that you're hearing against Convention of States. And so I camped out there for a while, and then I went over to the other side to Convention of States, and I went over there, and I was on the fence for quite a while because I want the next generation to succeed. I want to keep our freedoms, keep our liberty. We all love America in this room. I want to thank Ms. Southwell, or if I mispronounced her name, I'm sorry. I love the discussion. I love opposition. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of things, and we can't let this be emotionally charged. We have to learn how to disagree on things and keep it to the point, keep the main thing the main thing. The thing I want to take a different route as what I plan to talk about today, and that is that one of the things that I looked at when it comes to my decision to support Convention of States is that I just looked and saw, okay, so who's supporting Convention of States? And, you see big names like Ben Shapiro, Lieutenant Colonel West, Charlie Kirk, Senator Rand Paul, Governor Greg Abbott, Sean Hannity, Ben Carson, Mike Huckabee. And then getting into the point of well, how do we assure the people that we elect are going to do the right thing? Well, that comes to the great people like Morton Blackwell, who started Leadership Institute, who is going to equip candidates to be effective in office. And so the thing is, I know even the opposition we all can agree on, we need fiscal restraints on the federal government, restraints on federal power, term limits on the, federal officials. And I've studied a lot of the Constitution. I don't want to get into the mechanics of that, but this has been a big learning endeavor for myself. And there's just plenty there. I just don't see how someone could say I'm for the Constitution, but yet speak against the Constitution in the same breath. And so our framers were smart people, and they knew exactly what was going to happen. And they saw the tyranny, what was happening with Great Britain. They looked way back in history. They predicted all these things. I mean, as far as what they could see at that time, they're great people. And with that said, that's all I have. I appreciate this opportunity.
Right, Mr. Russell, thank you very much. Is there any questions for Mr. Russell? Any questions for Mr. Russell? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Russell. Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, committee
Yes.
members. My name is Jordan Hoyt, Hoyt. I am from Glen Rock, Wyoming. And my involvement started with, I think being a mom kind of opened your perspective so much when you have another generation that you start thinking about. And you start thinking about grandchildren and what their future is going to look like. And that's kind of where mine started. What can I do? Like, I'm an able-bodied person. Look to me like, what can I do? And so I kind of stumbled on Convention of States and really liked the idea of it, of using the Constitution to restructure it back to what its original intent was. We have gotten so far off of our original blueprint with just a little change here, a little change here. A lot of those come from Supreme Court decisions, which our founding fathers wanted the Supreme Courts to have the least amount of power. And today we look at them and they have the most. So I decided to homeschool my kids, and my oldest is 6, and it started with kindergarten. And I believe that we have great teachers. And I think that the amount of restrictions, they were teaching a lesson that everybody had to teach. And when I asked the teacher, I said, I'm trying to understand this so I can, have conversation with my kids. And why are you teaching this? And the teacher had no idea, but it was in their curriculum. They had to teach it. And that to me was kind of like a red flag. I know we have great people. I know we have great people in the legislature. And I know I have faith in you guys that we can do this. This is something that can be done. And if you're against it, I kind of question why you're in government in the first place. Because if you have no faith in the people that we are putting into government to use the Constitution to restructure it and to get us back to the right, correct, straight path, not this meandering path we're on, then why are you there? Do you believe you can make a difference if you don't think anybody else can? So that is one question I have. And then I think that this is what more perfect way to restore the Constitution than to go back to the exact way that it was created in the first place. Getting you guys together in everybody from the 50 states together and saying, what can we do? How can we make this better? And great minds are just going to inspire each other to get to the bottom of it and do what needs to be done. And I'm from a generation that I think really became disconnected from our civic duty. And it might even been my parents' generation. But I am taking it upon myself to engage people again and let them know that this system still works. This government still works for us. We don't have to overthrow it. We don't have to go another direction. Get involved, get informed, get educated. And I know Convention of States is going to take some time. So my word that I'm giving to you guys is that I'm going to go out and I'm going to inform your constituents so that you guys can have faith that you guys are the most connected to the people. And that's why this is important, because in DC, when they propose amendments, some of them have been there for my entire lifetime. So they are completely removed from the voice of the people. And you guys are so close, and I have faith in you. And I know you guys have a very difficult job with the hostile, emotions of a lot of people and the fact that we are so disengaged. So it is my word to you guys that I am going to go out and make a difference. I am going to get people involved. I am going to start a wildfire across the state of Wyoming, and I hope it spreads, that you guys can have faith in the people that are behind you and supporting you. And that way, when you send delegates to a constitution or a convention of states, that you can have faith in them. And we don't have to worry about fear anymore. We can rest in our faith, because faith has to be bigger than fear.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hoyt. Thank you for the emotional presentation. Any questions for Ms. Hoyt? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you, Ms. Hoyt, for coming and presenting to us.
Senator Wasserberger has a question, sir.
Oh, okay. All right, Senator Wasserberger.
Check and make sure my district is actually Northern Converse County, and either you're in my district or you're in Senator Boner's district.
Senator Boner's
Okay.
district. I'm probably right on that. We live clear out north of Converse County, so I could be either, depending on my address,
Well, if you're
where we're
north,
at.
I'm your buddy.
I'm north, yep, okay. Well, I would love to have lunch with you sometime.
Okay, well, welcome.
Okay, well, Senator Wasserberger finds another constituent. All right. Thank you, Ms. Hoyt. Is there anyone else in the audience that is against the CONCON? We've now heard 9 for it, and I think it's time we heard some against it. Or yes,
Sorry to
Senator
interrupt, but Senator Case would like your attention, and he has no means of getting it. So
Senator Case.
May Senator Case come to the microphone, please?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senators. I kind of think back. Can you imagine how exciting it was to have the early formation of this country and prior to the Constitutional Convention and afterwards, and the high level of interest and intellect that the populace had? And can you imagine being there when the Federalist Papers were coming out and having, going to the coffee shop and having the Federalist Papers there, and you talk about it with these people, and can you imagine what that was like as we wrestled with the, coming at the kind of the end of the torturous forming of this country, which must have been just hellacious when you think about the differences of opinion when we decide to split with Great Britain, and I just can't imagine. So I look at this and I think it can't be that bad what we have now. I do find that what we're seeing is a bifurcated country in a very dramatic way that I think is harmful and hurtful. I see colleagues that represent different sides of that, and we're in Wyoming, and so we're kind of unique. We still talk to each other. We still try to work it out, and our nation is very, very polarized. But I'm trying to think, what would be the benefits to our nation to have this dialogue about reasserting the balance between states and the federal government? It was a very important balance that was carefully crafted, and that was one of the major issues in the formation of our government, was to offset the land and territory and local governments versus high population centers. And you know what that is?
that is the equivalent of the red versus blue today in a lot of ways. Not exclusively, there are blue people in red states and red people in blue states, and it's okay. But this is a crux of that discussion again. In a crucible that we need to work it out. We need to work it out in a way that's not tweets, and it's not disrespectful, and it's debated at the coffee shops, and we move forward. I believe this provides that opportunity with the safety valves in the Constitution. I am not worried about a runaway convention. I realize that the country is mostly blue now, and that we are possibly going into a convention, a historic convention in a blue country. That doesn't bother me. I'll tell you why. It is because of the process itself. First, we have the call for the convention. It takes 2/3 of the states to do that. Up to the eve of the convention, there has to be 2/3. The morning of the opening of the convention, there has to be 2/3 that support it. If at any time in that journey, and it'll be a long journey, and we'll talk about it in coffee shops, and we'll say, look at what these guys are proposing, look what those guys are proposing. States can say, whoa, it's going in the wrong direction. I rescind our call. We could do it ourselves in the Wyoming legislature with a special session. We can call ourselves in. And if we needed to, we could. Oh my gosh. And so that's important. That's in the whole term of the process. But do you know what this whole thing is? It's proposing an amendment. It's not developing amendments. I mean, it's not ratifying amendments. So that the work of the convention, which might last weeks, might last hours, but I think the weeks is better, and that having these discussions, our version of Federalist Papers, and people understanding their government and talking about the balance of power between the states and the federal government is very healthy. But supposing it goes south, in our opinion, or what I might think, then we get a chance to look at it again. Because unless we would have the opportunity, if the state ratification is the method, that we would be one of 3/4 of states. Now flip that around. It only takes 1/4 of the states to say, no, that is our safety valve. You know, I'm convinced that our structure has been in place so long with an increasing federal side to the balance of power that no one even really realizes it. We've just kind of gradually gone down the slope. And what our founding fathers, they made a few mistakes. They did not imagine about popular political support behind someone. They didn't imagine you could get elected repeatedly. They did not imagine political parties. Some of them did, but political parties were kind of in, they were really frowned upon, and it was really hoped that the political parties wouldn't hijack the country. I don't think they could imagine a thing like safe districts, like campaign finance, or how much it costs to run for election. These are kind of the reasons that perhaps we just can't recall our guys back there and send somebody new. So, trust. I think there are extremists on both sides. And I think this is actually a middle of the road proposal. I hope it's one of many things where we discuss reforms to our country. I think it's really good to talk about fiscal responsibility. It really is okay to talk about whether people have been in office too long and whether it's too powerful. There's nothing wrong with that. I hope you'll support it. And if you support it for now, and then we get on the eve of the convention, Wyoming does not have to maintain, and we have rescinded orders before. So, thank you guys. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Case. Thank you for any questions for Senator Case? Any questions for Senator Case? Hearing none. Is there anyone else in the audience that is opposed to it. Representative Larson, I'm going to wait until I see if there's somebody else that is opposed to this bill. We've had 9 now for it. We're a little out of balance here. So there's no one else in the audience that's opposed. Let's hear from one more person that's for it, which I'm assuming that's Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that there are people virtually that have their hand raised that are opposed to it. So when we get done with Representative Larson, maybe you can open up to the virtual testimony people.
All right, sounds good. Representative Larson.
Mr.
Let's hear from
Chairman.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to get here and tell you I support this bill totally. Been at it for ever since I came, 6 years. We got the balanced budget amendment passed a couple years ago. We got a delegate limitation act passed a couple years ago. We can control who we send there, and I think we just need to get one started, and the states need to take back their control of this government, and more than likely the feds will see that we are very close. And they'll do something because they don't want us to know that we have some power. So that's all my testimony. I sure hope it gets out of committee and get it over to the other side.
Any questions for Representative Larson? Any questions for Representative Larson?
Just a quick comment. At least when I was teaching American history, Campbell County High School, I spent a lot of time studying all of the constitutional conventions and the amendments. I saw that in a time where there was a lot of pressure in the public, like we're seeing now, the opportunity to release some pressure, this was a great way to do that. And I feel, at least watching the United States, that there's that kind of volatility in our communities. The people are angry and upset. And so I see this as a great way to relieve some pressure and to talk about things. And I'm with Senator Case on exactly what he said. And typically what had happened in the 17 amendments after the Bill of Rights, there was that much pressure, and then finally Congress acted. And so, because they want the credit for it. And that's okay. I don't have a problem with that as long as we can get it. So just a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. All right. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. I'm going to apologize to the other 2 representatives that are here. I'm going to cut you off. I've got 10 in favor of this bill now, and only 1 that is in the opposition. So I'm going to go to the virtual and ask for some of the opposition to the bill, and so that the committee has both sides of this view. So thank you for coming, though. We appreciate it. And Rihanna, can you give me some of the virtual ones?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm admitting them, and I don't know who's for or against it, but I will have them brought in, and then when they can turn their camera on, and then you can call on them as necessary. So I'll just bring everyone in because it's hard to tell who's for or against it virtually.
Okay, virtually, you heard me. I want to call on the people that are against the bill, because we've had 10 people say they are for it and heard their testimony. So I want to hear some testimony against it before we close this public comment. So can you give me an indication? I think I know Marty Halverson, I think you're opposed. So can you go ahead, Marty, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the basis for my testimony today is that there is nothing wrong with our current Constitution. That I am coming from that place. And my good friend from Teton County gave you a little hint as to my testimony. And but I'm going to proceed as if he hadn't. I strongly oppose this resolution and ask for your nay vote. The first call, imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government. It's an admirable goal, but naive. To think that an amendment to this current constitution is going to restrain any administration with a printing press at its disposal. The Office of Management and Budget, the House and Senate Budget Committees, House and Senate Ways and Means Committees, and other actors involved in this country's fiscal and budget policies are capable of such smoke and mirrors that any restraint imposed by the Constitution will become just another hurdle to work around. A recent example is President Obama claiming that the PPACA was, quote, paid for, while hiding the fact that $750 million was being stolen from Medicare to pay for it. Crafty government officials and congressional staffers can spin a budget to fit any restraint a convention fantasizes it can impose. And do not doubt this. Any new attempt to fiscally restrain Washington, D.C. will be the excuse any administration needs to impose massive tax hikes. The second call, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The power of the federal government is already limited by Article 1, Section 8 of the original Constitution, plus the 9th Amendment and the 10th Amendment. I can't imagine what amendment could be brought that is more explicit or include more limitations than those. As the federal government has for 200 years since Congress first proposed an unconstitutional transportation department, felt unlimited in its power and jurisdiction, aided and abetted by a complicit judiciary that finds rights in the Constitution that just do not appear there. No amendment could possibly overcome congressional compulsions to act for the general welfare, even though that is only in the preamble. And make no mistake, there is vigorous debate about the clauses of the preamble are not part of the Constitution. Finally, for those who think, however mistakenly, that the Supreme Court of the United States is the ultimate authority, remember that its Chevron deference decision gave all the power to the unelected agencies to interpret the laws they see fit. The states and we citizens of those states don't have a chance of limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government as long as that ruling stands. The third call, limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. This is especially egregious, in my opinion. Our US senators and representatives are the only members of the federal government that come home to face the voters. I stipulate that many of them are part of the numerous problems that have plagued our relationship with the federal government, but they are only one of many causes of the very serious congressional and governmental dysfunctions. The others are the real permanent political class that are long-serving, partisan, unelected bureaucrats at every level who cannot be fired. Long-serving, powerful, partisan, unelected congressional and congressional committee staffers. Long-serving, unelected, and powerful, highly paid special interest lobbyists who write the bills for the long-serving, unelected, partisan congressional committee staffers. Rotating, highly paid academic and crony capitalist contractor consultants, wealthy, partisan, issue-oriented foundations that work with and influence the administrative, rule-writing, unaccountable bureaucracy, today commonly referred to as the fourth branch of government, a branch that is neither constitutional nor democratic. Officials who are political appointees are already serving at the pleasure of an incumbent president. As a matter of fact, they are the only government officials that are term limited. Most of the employees of the federal government are protected by the 1883 Civil Service Act enacted in the progressive era and strengthened regularly since, and the unions that represent them. Witnessed the efforts of 2 presidents and the many years it took to finally fire an administrator in the Veterans Administration. Our country's earliest document, the Articles of Confederation, included term limits, known as, at the time, as rotation, but were omitted in the 1789 Constitution in favor of frequent elections. Those who stood against term limits in 1789 argued that regular elections by the people could be a better check on corruption than constitutional limits, and that such restrictions would create their own problems. On the other hand, long-serving representatives and senators used their tenure to more effectively advocate for constituents who need to deal with the deep state bureaucracy, recently called the federal colossus, of the Social Security Administration, Medicare, or Veterans Affairs, just to name a few, then new congressmen who arrive in Washington, D.C. with expiration dates stamped on their foreheads. Please know that the average tenure of a U.S. congressman is 6.5 years. The group U.S. term limits lost in the United States Supreme Court in a unanimous decision. A constitutional amendment is their final recourse. Exactly who is driving term limits and exactly why? Exactly who is so invested in limiting the terms of the only people that have to go home to face the voters and to assess firsthand the impact of their decisions, that so much money and so much effort has been poured into this terrible idea. Term limits may add rotation to the legislative branch, but it will only cede additional power to a permanent 4th branch of government, bureaucratic staffers who do not stand for election. In summary, it is naive to expect any amendment to the Constitution to impose fiscal restraints on a body whose livelihood depends on unrestrained financial largesse. Ways will be found to circumvent any restraints imposed by an amendment. Many states, including Wyoming, are now developing mechanisms by which the power and jurisdiction of the federal government may be limited. One mechanism, regardless of what you heard earlier, is Thomas Jefferson's rightful remedy. One only needs to look at California to see Exhibit A of the utter failure of term limits and its consequences. Term limits is the ultimate dream of the unelected bureaucracy. Without those pesky electeds to deal with, that 4th branch of powerful rulemaking, regulation imposing, can't be fired, actual powers that be will be unfettered in their tyranny. Please vote no on Senate Joint Resolution 2.
Any questions for Ms. Halverson? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none. Marty, thank you very much for your testimony. We love to hear from you on any subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This one. Thank you. The rest of the people that are on the Zoom here, can you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to where you're going with this? Okay, there's one down, there's one down, there's one down, there's one down. Quite a few downs. Okay, we'll get some more downs here. Kathy Ide, would you please go ahead? Can't hear you. Turn your microphone on, Kathy. Introduce yourself and go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. I'm losing my notes here. Today I would like to urge your no vote on the Convention of States bill. Even though the claim by Convention of States supporters would lead everyone to believe that an Article 5 convention can be limited, it cannot. There is nothing in Article 5 that says anything about limiting a convention. Convention of States supporters claim that Article 5 allows the states to bypass Congress, but it does no such thing. Article 5, in fact, places limits on the states, not on Congress. The Congressional Research Service has confirmed that it would be Congress who determines the number of delegates and selection process for them and for setting convention procedures. I ask you, Mr. Chairman, with the current makeup of our Congress, who would even for a moment consider that our Constitution would be in safe hands? Our current problems were not caused by an incomplete or flawed Constitution. The problem is government officials at all levels who refuse to obey our existing Constitution and refuse to adhere to rule of law. Rewriting our Constitution is not going to change that. The states have done nothing to discourage the explosion of federal growth, even though in many cases, all they have had to do is say no. Two examples of this are the adoption of the federal government's Common Core standards and optional pieces of the budget-busting Medicaid expansion. There are two tools in our toolbox that Wyoming has yet to use to correct the abuses of the federal government, and those are Article 6 and nullification. Wyoming has failed to use either of these two. I sent out an email yesterday to our senators with a quote from President Calvin Coolidge, quote, "It is much more important to kill bad bills than to pass good ones," end quote. I believe this quote is so pertinent to the Convention of States bills. The risk of an Article 5 Convention of States has the potential to cause irreparable damage to our Constitution, damage that cannot be undone. I believe that this is a risk we can't take. So I would just urge your no vote on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ide. Any questions for Ms. Ide? Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next is Scott Brown. Scott, would you introduce yourself? And
yes, thank you. I'm Scott Brown from Lovell, Wyoming. In response to some of the, I do have a written testimony that I'll read, but in response to some of the comments that were made by those who are in favor of this legislation, I'd just like to pose a question. First make a statement, pose a question. The Second Amendment states, in part, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that's an amendment that is already part of our Constitution. Yet, how many bills have passed our legislature or our Congress that have placed infringements upon our right to bear arms? And what right to bear arms infringements do we think the Biden administration is going to place upon us? So let's fast forward and say that we do have this Convention of States, and that in this Convention of States, there's a bill that says that the United States government cannot exceed in spending what it brings in. If we look at how well the federal government has complied with the Second Amendment, why in the world would we ever think that that an amendment's going to stop them from overspending? So now I'll read my prepared. I urge you to oppose SJ2, Convention of States. When Mark Levin first came out with his Liberty Amendments and his promotion of a Convention of States, I asked the question of how the states requiring more of the federal government by way of additional amendments would ever bring about the desired changes that our federal government is already violating, or when the federal government is already violating the Constitution in so many ways. Rather than give the federal government more amendments to adhere to, what we need to do is hold them to their original contract with the states, which is the Constitution, and hold them accountable for the breaches that they have already made to that contract. We need to remember that it was the states that created the federal government and not the other way around. The states need to hold the federal government to its enumerated roles, responsibilities, and powers. There is no better way to do this. There is a better way to do this than a risky constitutional convention. This better way will be introduced in the Wyoming House this week and is known as the Wyoming Sovereignty Act. And Wyoming will join a number of other states considering ways to push back against federal government overreach and outright violations of the Constitution. The Wyoming Sovereignty Act will provide for procedures to enforce the integrity of the United States Constitution. It will establish a standing joint committee on federalism, which will audit Wyoming's leadership, which will audit Wyoming's relationship with the federal government in accordance with that Constitution. It will establish procedures for declaration of unconstitutional federal actions, and it will require that all laws comply with the state and federal constitutions. Again, I urge you to oppose SJ2 and any form of constitutional convention, and I would then urge you to support the Wyoming Sovereignty Act. I yield.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Is there any questions for Mr. Brown? Any questions for Mr. Brown? All right, thank you. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Brown. We have a hard stop at 1:50, so I'm going to give one more speaker time here, but we're gonna cut it off at 1:50. So Tim Velder, how about you filling us out here?
In the interest of time, I will not repeat some things that have already been said, but I do ask that you oppose SJ2. My name is Tim Velder of Sundance, Wyoming, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are no flaws in the Constitution that endanger our liberty. The flaws are the elected officials and their staffs. Each one of these politicians have accumulated, I'm estimating $85,000 in federal debt for every American man and woman and child. That's utterly preposterous to believe that they would change their ways because of a con. Stop swatting flies with a constitutional convention and get rid of the manure pile, and that's the bad politicians in our federal government. Yes, Congress will set the rules for this constitutional convention. Maybe we ought to throw it open to a popular vote. That's what most of our Congress people want to do. And we can see how that will probably turn out. Let's not get steamrolled by the big liberal states. Let's keep Wyoming independent and get rid of this con resolution. Lastly, maybe we should talk about some of the other allies who are in favor of a constitutional convention, such as Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, who wanted to get rid of the Second Amendment, Harvard Law professor and prominent socialist Lawrence Lessig, 600 leftist organizations supporting MoveToAmend.org, The Nation magazine, other advocates for constitutional amendments harmful to our Constitution are Hillary Clinton, environmentalist Tom Steyer, political activist George Soros, and former President Barack Obama, all who have declared the U.S. Constitution is too restrictive for their political agenda. Amendments aren't part of their strategy. The con is a head fake that gives the aforementioned elites the opportunity to open the gates to which their Trojan horses can wreak havoc on the base text of the Constitution itself. Please vote no on SJ2. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Velder. Any questions for Mr. Velder? Any questions for Mr. Velder, committee? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Velder, for being with us. Nice assortment of license plates there. That's going to conclude the public comment for this SJ 002, and I'm going to put off the voting on it until the next meeting, which would be Friday at noon. So with that, we're going to be adjourned, committee, so we can get back to a 2 o'clock legislative meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Sorry, most of you didn't get to speak.